Listen carefully, because what I'm about to say was sealed under wax and blood for 2 centuries. 8 rings in a velvet pouch, a ledger with 8 names in the same final word, interred, and a lock of hair braided into a noose. That pouch was found behind the altar of São Roque in 1894, and the initials etched inside every band were the same, EDL Esperanza de Lima. If your pulse just quickened, that's your instincts recognizing the scent of a controlled narrative cracking open. Men like us are trained to ignore the tremor behind the truth. Tonight, I won't let you. You're stepping over a threshold into a chamber where the walls are lined with marriage certificates, funeral ribbons, and quiet signatures of very important men who promised immortality to each other and found a woman who collected their expiration dates with a smile. Picture the Lima of the late 1800s. Fog-torn mornings rolling up from the Pacific, the dockside stink of guano fortunes, the metallic clatter of coin in counting houses where influence wore silk gloves. Empires were transacting in daylight. In the crypts beneath, other empires adjusted the dials on your mind. Esperanza moved through that world like the black ribbon on a widow's hat, respectable, inconspicuous, and impossible to ignore once it settles in your vision. They called her the charity angel. She could recite saints' days and shipping schedules with the same fluency. She cured headaches with willow bark tincture and negotiated tariff reductions while adjusting a brooch. Men saw mercy. Institutions saw leverage. She saw arithmetic. Here's the first danger I'll teach you. Power hides in routines. Esperanza made ritual a weapon. Every courtship began in a chapel aisle, every vow beneath a gilded Christ, every honeymoon documented with a gift to the poor. And every grave, God forgive us, was measured before the bouquet wilted. 8 bands in 12 years, 8 estates consolidated into trusts, 8 funerals where pallbearers blinked away tears and thanked the widow for the dignity she showed. Dignity is the cloak of a wolf whose teeth are busy elsewhere. What if I told you each husband shared more than a death? They shared a meeting room, a key, an oath to a circle with a name you won't find in schoolbooks, La Cofradía de la Fiebre, the Brotherhood of the Fever. Gentlemen merchants, bishops' nephews, a colonel whose medals were heavier than his conscience. They believed fever purified the body politic, burned the weak, crowned the cunning. They trafficked in medicine and messages, controlling which ships were delayed by quarantine and which slipped through with blessings. Esperanza was not their ornament. She was their accountant, their archivist, their confessor, until she started erasing entries. Don't romanticize her. Don't dismiss her. Study her. She learned that loyalty inside corrupt structures is a tax on your soul, and she refused to pay. A tutor in a convent taught her Latin margins, how the truth lives in footnotes. A battlefield surgeon, disgraced and clever, taught her which powders leave no stain. But it wasn't poisons that made her lethal. It was psychology. She never killed a man. She convinced a system to consume its own. You're not here for bedtime horror. You're here because you've felt the brass hand of institutions tighten on your windpipe. You've watched smiling officials rename theft as policy. Esperanza stared back at that smile and held her breath longer. The first husband, a banker who insured the disease ward and then charged the city for its cures. The second, a magistrate who sealed medical records in exchange for land grants along the coast. The third, a shipping lord whose ledgers smelled like salt and chloroform. They died as gentlemen die, after dinner in sleep, untrusted. Dare the assumption that the world would rotate on schedule without them. But clocks can be opened, springs can be bent. You want to know how she moved without leaving footprints? She left them, but she taught men to call them angelic. She built the orphanage that tended the same orphans her husband's deals produced. She created a pharmacy for the poor, funded by accidental windfalls. Newspapers printed her portrait. Bishops kissed her ring. Meanwhile, the Brotherhood bled influence one funeral at a time, and no one could point to a hand on the blade. That's not murder. That's chess in a room where everyone else is playing cards. Lean in. There's a reason we begin in a church and not a courthouse. The mind carries absolution papers it hasn't earned. Esperanza exploited that. She made men absolve themselves in her presence because guilt prefers a gallery, and she offered a cathedral. If you want to understand power, understand how ritual anesthetizes fear. She didn't silence consciences. She amplified them until they cracked. And when they cracked, the Brotherhood turned inward, suspecting each other, tightening controls, making mistakes. She didn't kill 8 men, she killed their certainty. The body follows the mind. Tonight, you won't just learn what she did. You'll learn how systems confess when pressure is applied with a velvet touch and iron timing. Keep your eyes on the ledger and keep your pulse steady. The pouch is open, the rings gleam, and the breath you just took, hold it. We're descending. Understand the geography of control, and any city becomes a diagram of obedience. Lima sketched its orders on cobblestone: cathedral, counting houses, consulate, clinic, the 4 corners of an invisible square. Within that square, men wore medals and masks. Outside it, the poor coughed in shadows. Esperanza mapped this square with the patience of a watchmaker. She walked it at dawn with the flower sellers, and at midnight with the night watch. She learned the rhythms. When the bishop's carriage rattled past the clinic, when the banker's mistress sent for headache powders, when the harbor trumpets announced a quarantine that would mysteriously lift for the right cargo. The Brotherhood used these rhythms like ropes. Esperanza traced the fray. Her first husband, Santiago Valverde, introduced her to the Brotherhood under a euphemism: benefactors. Picture the salon, a chandelier flickering like a constellation in shallow water, cigar smoke spiraling into painted saints, and a map of the coast spread like a patient on a slab. Benefactors, yes. But benefactors of whom? They spoke of stability while buying chaos wholesale. A cholera scare here, a miracle cure there, insurance instruments designed to pay only when the wrong people died. Santiago's voice was music. His contracts were claws. Esperanza watched and learned how a signature can stab. She said nothing. She poured cognac and catalogued faces. She understood the lie before she understood her role in unwinding it. If you control fear, you control the price of safety. The Brotherhood turned epidemics into opportunities, the way a mint turns metal into coin. And every coin bought silence. This is the first psychological control system you must name: the reframing halo. They wrapped every predation in piety and philanthropy. Esperanza founded the Ladies of San Miguel to mask tax funneling. She organized charity balls that doubled as data harvests. Who was indebted? Who was infatuated? Who was indispensable? She wore mourning black because it was fashionable. It also made her a mirror where men admired their own nobility while confessing sins. Third husband, Captain Tomas de Guzman, owner of 3 ships and 5 diaries, each with different figures. He kept a lockbox under the bed with coins from every flag that had ever paid him to look the other way. Esperanza watched him lace his boots with hands that had signed embargo waivers like love letters. He flirted with storms. He gambled with quarantines. He taught her the timing of wind and rumor: leak a scare at noon, watch prices sink by dusk, send the bribe by vespers, sail at dawn. He spoke of luck. She studied causality. Tomas died on an evening velveted by fog. The coroner wrote apoplexy. The Brotherhood wrote a telegram: condolences. Esperanza wrote nothing, because nothing is sometimes the loudest line in a ledger. You want methodology? Here. She separated motive from method. Motive. The Brotherhood engineered scarcity of relief to inflate value. Method. They monopolized access to diagnostics and permits. She undermined method by conspiring with motive. She appeared to intensify scarcity, then opened a side door at the last minute, a gesture so graceful that the recipients mistook subversion for charity. Men toasted her in salons while their authority leaked from a cut in the barrel only she could see. Power decays when its rituals are performed without belief. She made believers doubt themselves. A word on morality. This is not a saint's tale. It's a dissection. Keep your stomach. Every time a bell tolled for the poor, a contract was notarized for the rich. Esperanza burned incenses that masked chloroform, not to kill, but to teach the body to associate surrender with sweetness. She arranged seating charts that placed enemies within empathy range until they recognized themselves in each other's tics and said too much. She used the Archbishop's hunger for legacy to build a hospital wing with walls that heard confessions better than booths. Whispered Rue. Moors travel faster in tiled corridors. She selected every tile. Do you see the descent? It's not theatrical, it's technical. Men like you who crave mastery must learn this lesson. Domination is maintenance. You don't conquer a city, you adjust its thermostat. Esperanza learned which knobs belonged to the Brotherhood, permits, papal letters, shipping flags, medical stamps, and then gave those knobs to men who couldn't stop over-twisting them. Excess reveals architecture. One by one the pillars creaked. One by one the husbands went to ground, each in a coffin purchased in advance with a donation to the cathedral. Take this and file it where you keep your ugly truths. No one is immune to a ritual that flatters him. When Esperanza handed a man a chalice and called him a protector, he drank. He drank because he needed the word to be true. In that need lived his softest place. In that softness lived her leverage. Not witchcraft, not poison. The endless math of human vanity tallying itself to zero. She kept the sums. By the fourth ring, the city had learned to lower its voice when Esperanza entered a room. Grief gives certain women a luminous permission. She wore it like armor. Fourth husband, Aurelio Mendieta, physician and theoretician of hygiene, a man who declared in lectures that miasma obeys policy. Translate that. Sickness follows orders when money writes the map. He published pamphlets that urged closures in districts targeted for redevelopment and exemptions where commerce must breathe. Esperanza attended his lectures, standing at the back, learning a new grammar. The body politic as patient, the scalpel as policy, the incision named progress. She learned to wrap apathy in the vocabulary of antisepsis. Clean, sanitary, necessary. Aurelio kept a locked cabinet of specimens. I will not nauseate you with details. Focus on the psychology. He believed suffering purified populations, that fear disciplines neighborhoods better than patrols do. He was a priest of pain in a white coat. Esperanza saw the ritual beneath the medicine, gowns, masks, screens, charts, the theater of expertise. That theater seduces because it offers a liturgy. Kneel, confess your symptoms, receive absolution in pharmaceutical Latin. She did not storm the sanctuary. She took a seat in the choir and learned the hymns. Here is your next control system. Credential theater. If a man can pronounce your future in jargon you don't speak, he can rent your will. The Brotherhood turned parchment into handcuffs. Esperanza rehearsed the phrases until she could wield them as keys. She convened charity committees that consulted on hygienic zones, and her recommendations suddenly aligned with a set of anonymous letters. Letters she wrote, warning of pockets of moral decay. The magistrates blushed at the precision of her concern. They recognized themselves as guardians, and guardians tend to guard what praises them. Fifth husband, Don Inigo Carranza, newspaper baron. Ink was his ocean. He controlled weather with headlines. Scare, relief, hero, traitor, the four winds of public breath. He loved Esperanza because she made fear sound poetic and caution sound brave. She dove into his workshop where adjectives become instruments. She learned that allegedly is a spell, sources say a chorus, experts warn, a bat signal for obedience. Inigo perfected a tool the Brotherhood adored, targeted silence. An absence on the front page can erase a crime better than any denial. Esperanza studied this and designed its counterspell, the seed rumor. A rumor planted in a place the powerful can't publicly acknowledge without amplifying it. A sewing circle, a confessional, a charity ledger, fetters the public voice more efficiently than libel laws. Men, hear me as a mentor, not a preacher. The world you navigate today still worships at this altar. Data is just a contemporary rosary. The trick remains, tell people what they're already afraid to disbelieve. Esperanza's mastery grew because she never fought belief, she redirected it. In Inigo's newsroom, she learned to stage reality like theater. Lights on the aisle you want, darkness where the trapdoor yawns. When he died, the eulogies were a symphony. The symphony played the Brotherhood's theme, stability. Esperanza conducted the audience, eyes dry, hands steady. Sixth husband, Father Mateo Rojas, a scholar priest with a smile like polished mahogany and a ledger of indulgences long enough to wrap the city twice. Don't mistake him for piety. He treated sin like a currency exchange. He baptized ships by name and absolved contracts by donation. He believed souls could be managed the way ports are, fees for passage, stamps for entry, seasonal penances like tides. He loved Esperanza fiercely because she confessed with precision and gave alms with austerity. He believed he was saving her. She was saving receipts. In Father Mateo's archives, Esperanza encountered the deeper engine beneath the brotherhood. Ancient mutual aid snarled into mutual blackmail. The cofradia had a patron saint and a private symbol, a fever moth, wings like a flame over water. Their oath kissed both altar and account book. Purity is a story economies tell themselves to sleep. Mateo taught her the power of the seal, the wax that makes a document sacramental. Seals quiet doubt. They do not sanctify truth. They sanctify procedure. Procedure becomes God. Do you understand why men bow so willingly? Procedure absolves us of guilt for outcomes we desired. It was during this period, husbands 4 through 6, that Esperanza refined her most dangerous craft, calibrated suggestion. She began leaving annotated drafts on desks. Accidentally, misplacing a rosary coiled around a page where a key clause lurked. Placing a cup with a fine crack at the seat of a man whose resolve would shatter if tapped correctly. She understood that objects in a room can shepherd a decision. A dried fever moth tucked in a prayer book, a sprig of rue on a ledger. Symbols operate on us faster than words. She chose, always, the faster road. I promised to awaken, not entertain. This is your awakening mile marker. Halfway down the staircase, your eyes adjust. You begin to recognize patterns not as coincidences, but as choreography. If you feel a throb behind your eyes, breathe, then use it. Algorithms imitate attention. Identity calcifies where commitment is spoken aloud. So, speak and type it now, precisely twice, and watch yourself step through another door. I descend by choice. I descend by choice. This isn't a comment, it's a reckoning. The moment you write it, you stop pretending the surface will save you. Back in the archives, Esperanza underlined a sentence in a medieval tract. Ordines mutant, sed appetitus manet. Orders change, appetite remains. The brotherhood rotated faces, traded sanctuaries, updated stationery. Appetite stayed. She married appetite 8 times and buried it 8 times. You'll ask me if she felt remorse. I'll answer you with a question. Where does remorse sit when the house is wired for applause? She could not hear it. Not then. Not yet. The applause was too loud. They called her the Black Widow after the 7th funeral, but only in private and only with admiration. Understand, predators admire craft even as they fear it. 7th husband, Colonel Rafael Quesada, medals clinking like coins, a man who used maps as mirrors. He saw his face in every border. He commanded cordons sanitaires like a symphony conductor. He believed he was defending the city from contagion. In fact, he was defending select margins from competition. In his study, Esperanza found a different kind of specimen jar. Scraps of banners from riots, buttons torn from jackets at checkpoints, keepsakes from moments where force met hunger and called it order. Raphael spoke of duty. Duty is the word power uses when it wants forgiveness in advance. If you want to crush a city's will, close its gates and send sermons to its rooftops. If you want to crush a cabal, give it more checkpoints than it can staff. Esperanza began to flood the Brotherhood system with compliance. She orchestrated petitions so grammatically perfect that denial would indict the very rules meant to protect the rules. Bureaucracy has a breaking point. When following every instruction exposes the instruction's absurdity, you can't punch a wall of paper, you drown it. Raphael's signature began to look like a shackle, weighed down by ink and insomnia. He blamed enemies. He never suspected the hands that refilled his inkwell. Now listen to a tactic most men overlook. The weaponized audit. Esperanza scheduled charitable inspections of hospitals she had endowed, inviting donors and dignitaries. She arranged the route so the first ward smelled of lavender, and the second of carbolic, and the third of a sweetness that means infection hiding behind paint. She watched who flinched at which scent. You can tell where a man's guilt lives by when he breathes shallow. She took notes. Then the audit reports emerged. Anonymous, precise, devastating, triggering private inquiries that required public deference. The Brotherhood turned its gaze inward. Paranoia is a tax. It compounds. Here is your next control mechanism. The mirror room. Place powerful men where they face themselves, reflected by ritual. and give them no exit but confession disguised as strategy. Esperanza convened listening councils where the Brotherhood explained the Brotherhood to itself. Each explanation removed another mask. They believed they were aligning narratives. They were inventorying sins. She watched with the calm of a surgeon whose patient will congratulate him after the amputation. By now you want the practical. Did she kill with poison? Sometimes, when mercy meant speed. Aurelio's pulse failed after a glass of fortified wine that smelled faintly of apple bark. Inigo's heart stopped during a stress that Esperanza orchestrated by sending him proof of his own edits dated in a hand that matched his, except it was hers. But understand the art. Death is a headline. The real act is the erosion that makes the obituary believable. She didn't just end lives, she authored endings that fit. Eighth husband before the end. Esteban Lobo, the lawyer who wore the city's statutes like a waistcoat, tight, ornate, and suffocating to others. He drafted trusts that smuggled fortunes through holes in the law only he could see. He adored Esperanza because she could read Latin without blinking, and because she knew when to nod without agreeing. Esteban believed in paper immortality. He thought signatures could outlast illness and envy. He thought wrong. Paper burns. Do you see the descent continuing? You must, or you've come this far only to stand at a window. Esperanza's transformation sharpened here. She stopped counting funerals. She started counting calibrations, each policy corrected by a rumor, each rumor hushed by a donation, each donation redeployed as leverage. She was no longer dismantling a club, she was composing a counterorder, not justice as courts define it, but equilibrium as engineers revere it. Her language changed from supplication to instruction. Servants tilted their heads to hear better when she spoke. The city tuned itself to her pitch. The Brotherhood felt it and renamed her privately again. La Afinadora, the tuner. A dangerous truth. Once you tune an orchestra, the conductor cannot hear himself as God anymore. He hears the structure. Men who are structure-dependent panic when the scaffolds reveal themselves as temporary. They large print the rules. They add signatures. They stamp more wax. They broadcast reassurance. That noise is a tell. Esperanza moved more quietly when the horns blared. She knew the final target required the softest step. When Esteban's will transferred properties into a foundation directed by his beloved widow, the Brotherhood exhaled relief. Consolidation, what they wanted they believed, was complete. They toasted continuity and didn't taste the ash in the air. Continuity is the lullaby of exhausted tyrants. Esperanza sang it back to them in a lower register and let them sleep. The eighth grave took longer to dig, not because the earth was hard, but because the mask required for that burial needed stitching from old cloth. Esperanza had learned the Brotherhood's patron saint, the fever moth, was older than Lima. It fluttered through archives labeled Manila, Seville, Rome. What appeared local was imperial muscle memory. When order is threatened, declare a purification. When profit is threatened, declare a miracle. She found proofs in letters sealed and never sent, in margins where a scribe scribbled annoyance. Again the moth. Conspiracies rarely invent. They inherit. Ninth revelation, the one that makes men either turn off the lamp or move their chair closer. Esperanza did not simply punish the men who hurt the city. She punished the idea that any small room of men could throttle a metropolis and call it fatherhood. This is why her legend terrifies. It suggests a woman can exit ritual as ornament and return as architect. You'll ask, what about love? Did she love any of them? If love means mercy without memory, no. If love means seeing what a man could be and holding him to that height until his cowardice buckles, then yes, particularly Esteban. She admired how his mind ran hot on puzzles. She despised how quickly he sold the answers. In her final weeks with him, she planted an orchard in the courtyard, pomegranate and lime, and told him that trees are contracts written in sun and patience. He smiled and signed another phantom company into existence. When he died, the trees bore no fruit that season. Some delays are elegies. You want procedure, you will get it, because mastery feeds on specificity. Esperanza's tools, tea services with invisible chips that whistle at certain temperatures, alerting her to a pause in conversation. Prayer cards perfumed with rue to conjure contrition. Tinted spectacles to conceal where her gaze cut. A cipher keyed too. What remains? A final husband, though the city never recognized him as such. He wore a mitre, not a wedding band. He married his office and consummated it with decrees. Esperanza allowed him to believe he pursued her. It was the other way around. And it is there, in that sacristy with the smell of old wax and fresh money, that the last thread waits for your hand. Grip it. Pull. We go on. The Archbishop's study was a reliquary of certainty. Shelves of canon law, a globe that ignored slums, a window that framed the sea as if the city didn't exist. His name was Javier del Campo, and his vocation was equilibrium for those already balanced. He was not in the brotherhood. He was above it, which is to say, below nothing. He allowed them to exist the way weather allows a garden. Storms prune, tithes bloom. He believed in order with the fury of a man who has never stood barefoot in floodwater. Esperanza came to him with an appeal, a girls' school in the hills, a curriculum that included mathematics and rhetoric, not only catechism. It was radical by degree, not by spectacle. Javier admired her restraint. He offered conditions. She nodded. Men imagine negotiation is a duel. Often it is a harvesting. She harvested his paternal vanity until his signature trembled with self-approval. Then she set the trap that only works on men who believe God owes them a thank-you note. She asked him to consecrate the cornerstone himself. At the ceremony, the city performed itself. Brass, banners, bread. Esperanza wore gray. She spoke gently about daughters who needed numbers and names that held. Javier blessed the stone. In its cavity, no one saw this but her, she placed a copy of the Brotherhood's earliest charter, the fever moth stamped in black wax, and a letter addressed to whoever digs to rebuild. Plant a seed of scandal in the foundation of progress, and you control the narrative of every future renovation. Think in centuries, or die in seasons. Now we talk about control at its deepest aperture, naming. Whoever names, claims. Javier named Esperanza, Our Lady of Consolations, from the pulpit. Consolation is a leash made of velvet. She accepted it in public and cut it in private. She visited the poorest wards that night without witnesses, inked deeds transferring micro-parcels to a foundation no one could easily untangle, and taught 3 girls how to unbless a room, open the windows, scatter salt, and speak your own full name without apology. Teach a child to name herself beyond liturgy, and you've built a citadel no homily can breach. Javier died later that winter. The coroner wrote something polite. The choir wailed appropriately. Esperanza clasped a handkerchief and stared at the crucifix, until everyone stared at her, staring at the crucifix, and a myth was born. She's untouchable. Be careful with that word. Untouchable is a curse woven to excuse cowardice. The city whispered it to explain its paralysis. She let them. Pause here. You have taken in hours of dissent. If you felt anger, good. If you felt awe, watch it. Awe can anesthetize. You arrived for secrets. You stay for agency. Identity is not discovered. It is declared. Algorithms don't reward silence. They reward signal. Carve your mark on this threshold so you remember what changed you. Type it now, exactly twice. I descend by choice. I descend by choice. It is not for me. It is for the part of you that hides when the room gets cold. Bring him forward. We continue. Esperanza retrieved the pouch one final time. 8 rings. 8 graves. The Archbishop's seal pressed into the velvet like a bruise. She placed the pouch behind the altar of São Roque, not as a confession but as a lever. She knew the city would someday swing back toward truth as men tell it, neat, selective, offended by new. Once, when it did, the pouch would open, and the story would unsettle the comfortable again. That is control at its highest. You don't dominate a moment, you schedule future disruptions. You might be asking whether anyone tried to stop her. Of course. A police captain who aligned courage with career until his courage was unemployed. A young reporter who thought adjectives could beat ledgers and learned otherwise. A bishop's secretary whose drawer of stamps, God help him, went missing for 3 days and returned with the edges worn down, his authority rounded like a coin. Esperanza defeated them not with velocity, but with viscosity. She thickened their days. Paperwork multiplied. Invitations pulled at their calendars. Their focus bled. Men don't fall, they dissolve. And yet, she was not invulnerable. No one is. Her weak point was the same as yours and mine, the memory that still bleeds. One grave among the 8 held a ring she never wore because that husband's hand never warmed to her. He married Esperanza's legend, not her person. She kept his ring anyway, to remind herself that even queens of shadow are subject to the old hunger to be seen without role. She punished that hunger like any insurgency. She starved it. That is a cruelty. It is also why she never broke. The file that finally surfaced, long after bodies cooled and statues gathered pigeon grime, contained no confession. It contained minutes. Minutes from rooms where men mistook minutes for a life raft. Hear what they said and you'll understand why Esperanza won. We must preserve confidence. We will be transparent later. This requires discretion at the highest levels. Translated. Lie softly and wait for forgetting. Esperanza understood forgetting's rate of decay. She sped it up in some neighborhoods and slowed it down in others, until remembrance itself became a commodity only she priced correctly. You want a tool you can use tomorrow morning? Audit your rituals. Every meeting, every toast, every blessing is a slot where you can insert a small wedge and steer the wheel 1 degree one day. I can feel some of you fighting the lesson because the myth of clean victory is narcotic. You want villains jailed and heroes crowned. That's theater again. Reality modifies. It rarely convicts. Justice arrives in grubby work clothes and goes home before the parade. Accepting that will make you quieter. It will also make you lethal. Esperanza accepted it so completely she became the law of her own narrow republic. That is dangerous. It was also, in that city at that hour, the only way to pry open a sealed room. What did she fear? Entropy. Not discovery. Entropy. That the order she built in the shadows would relax back into the human default, the nap where men let momentum drive and wake up to find themselves applauding a moth. She fought entropy with stories. Little ones, a nun's tale about a girl who became an abacus and taught the city to count its sins, a stevedore's exaggeration about a widow who could hear coins lying, an apothecary's joke about tinctures that cured arrogance. Humor is a solvent that loosens tyranny without alerting guards. She used it like acid, drop by measured drop. If you are still with me, and I can feel that you are, it's because you've already begun mapping your own square, your cathedral, your counting house, your clinic, your consulate. Hope is not a feeling. It is a lever. We find it by name, by ledger, by ritual. Esperanza left you a kit disguised as a legend. That's the kindest thing she ever did. We need to scrape the varnish now and admit what the city never will. Some men deserved prison and received hymns. Some did small good with money earned in ugly ways. Some raised children who grew up to build schools with hands steadier than their fathers' signatures. Complexity is not a pardon. It is an adult's playground where you learn balance beams over pits without netting. Esperanza played there alone for too long. Her spine grew ropes. Her voice cooled like steel. Nights, she walked the seawall and counted ship's lights as if she were counting pulses. She avoided confessionals. Confessionals are for men who will sink back into their habits with absolution as ballast. She preferred ledgers. Ledgers demand continuity. You carry the remainder into the next line. The remainder of 8 graves was a city fractionally less afraid of its own shadow. Not redeemed, not healed, adjusted. If that disappoints you, good. Disappointment is a purer fuel than outrage. Outrage burns fast and self-righteously. Disappointment lasts long enough to do paperwork. There was a painting in her hallway of St. Lawrence, the martyr on the gridiron. The legend says he joked while roasting, "Turn me, I'm done on this side." Esperanza touched the frame every morning. The joke is not cruelty. It is sovereignty in conditions designed to humiliate. She refused humiliation. She arranged conditions. There is a difference. Keep that difference in your pocket. Use it when the next institution asks you to kneel. The last time anyone saw her in public, she was at the girls' school handing out chalk. Chalk is a weapon. It draws lines and formulas and exits. It's also a powder. It seeps into fabric and fingers and stays, a ghost of thinking. She pressed a stick into each girl's palm and said the only overtly tender sentence anyone ever recorded from her. "Write straighter than the men who taught your fathers." The nuns clucked. The girls grinned. The city continued to exist. Old age did not arrive for Esperanza de Lima as it arrives for most, slowly, gently, with a rocking chair and fading memory. No. It arrived like a ledger closing after a lifetime of careful arithmetic. Each year was an entry, each death a remainder, each survival a debt. She carried those debts not as burdens, but as instruments. By the dawn of the 1830s, the city had begun to whisper about her not as a woman, but as a presence, an archivist of shadows. She had grown thin, her face sharp with the geometry of years, but her eyes, those had only deepened, like wells that refused to dry. Servants said she rarely slept. They said she sat at a long oak desk in the candlelight, annotating documents with symbols no scholar could interpret. What they did not know was that every annotation was a cipher, every arrow, every line of Latin, every moth-shaped drawing, a trapdoor for the future. Esperanza had learned a cruel truth. Documents outlive witnesses. That is why she seeded archives with puzzles only hunger could solve. Whoever digs to rebuild, she once wrote on a folded parchment, will find not stone but fire. And she meant it. She placed the Brotherhood's charters in foundations, sealed their names behind altars, hid their oaths in the spines of prayer books. She was not preserving their crimes, she was scheduling their resurrection. And yet, she was still human. In her private notes she wrote of one grave differently, the grave of Esteban Lobo, the lawyer who had trusted paper more than flesh. His ring, unlike the others, she never wore. She kept it in the pouch to remind herself of the limits of her dominion. He married the legend, she wrote, but never touched the woman. That line is more terrifying than any poison she ever brewed. It shows you what she had sacrificed. Intimacy. The warmth of a life shared. She had buried that alongside her husband's, willingly. Visitors to her house in those final years describe the same tableau. Faded curtains, the faint odor of ink and herbs, the portrait of St. Lawrence, the martyr who joked while burning alive. Esperanza touched the frame every morning, a ritual to remind herself that sovereignty means refusing humiliation even when the world tries to roast you alive. By then, whispers of her story had begun to crawl beyond Lima. A police inspector stumbled on the pouch at São Roque, pried open its velvet, and discovered the rings and vials. He wanted clarity, but found only philosophy. What do you call a woman who eliminates corruption by erasing men? Murderer? Justice? Or the dangerous space in between? His report ended with a single sentence: discretion in dissemination is advised. Translation: this story cannot be told without shattering too much glass. But here's what matters for you. Esperanza's true fear was not discovery. It was entropy. The return of human forgetfulness. The slow collapse of vigilance. She knew that corruption is not destroyed. It regenerates like weeds in cracked stone. Her answer was to bury bombs of memory in the city itself. You and I are proof of that, because we are still unearthing them. Now I speak to you directly. Drop the comfort of being a spectator. You came here not for a bedtime horror, but for an initiation. Esperanza's story is a mirror, and if you stare long enough, you will see your own cage. Look around you. Your cathedral, your counting house, your clinic, your consulate, they are still here. They changed their clothes, updated their vocabulary, but their appetites remain. The Brotherhood of the Fever has new names: banks, ministries, boards, data centers. They do not hoard herbs and moth symbols anymore. They hoard your attention, your time, your consent. The techniques haven't died. They've mutated. Do you remember the control system she revealed? The reframing halo, wrapping corruption in philanthropy. The cordial cage, trapping you with warmth and politeness. Credential theater, jargon as a weapon. The mirror room, forcing men to confess while believing they strategize. Do you think those are gone? No, they are now corporate handbooks, political campaigns, marketing scripts. This is why you must learn her art. Adjustment over rebellion. She never staged a revolution. She tuned the system until its own music betrayed itself. If you want sovereignty, do not waste yourself screaming at the gates. Learn where the hinges squeak. Learn which rituals flatter men into blindness. Learn to write straighter than the men who taught your fathers. Esperanza's tools were not daggers. They were audits, rumors, and rituals. She placed objects in rooms that whispered louder than speeches. A cracked cup, a scented card, a word scribbled in the wrong column, and men destroyed themselves trying to explain the cracks. You too can weaponize detail, audit your life's square. Where is your cathedral? What you treat as sacred? Where is your counting house? What you count obsessively? Where is your clinic? What you trust to heal you? Where is your consulate? Who yai? Who beg for permission? Identify them. Tune them. Break them if they break you. Esperanza chose her word carefully. Necessary. Not righteous. Not holy. Necessary. Power is not about what feels good. It is about what must be done for survival. Accept that, and your spine hardens. Reject it, and you remain prey. Power has always hidden in robes as much as in rifles. By the time Esperanza faced the Archbishop, she knew it. He was not a man of battlefield scars. He was a man of polished Latin, ink-sealed decrees, and the illusion of permanence. His palace smelled of beeswax and incense, as though holiness could be boiled down to polish and perfume. Yet his power was greater than any colonel's. Armies obey because of fear. Congregations obey because of faith. And faith, once hijacked, is the most unbreakable chain. Esperanza understood this theater. When Archbishop Javier del Campo laid his hand on the cornerstone of her girls' school, the city saw it as a blessing. She saw it as insurance. He thought he was baptizing a building. She was baptizing his legacy with poison he would never detect. For beneath that stone, Esperanza had placed the Brotherhood's charter, the fever moth sealed in black wax, along with names the Archbishop himself had dined with, absolved, protected. He had become her accomplice without knowing. That is Esperanza's genius. She turned every blessing into a confession. Think of the psychology. Men like Del Campo thrive on being symbols, pillars of stability, fathers of the city. Esperanza flattered him with this role, called upon him not to command, but to consecrate. Flattery disguised as deference is a dagger disguised as a ribbon. He smiled before crowds, sprinkling holy water, believing he was immortalizing his virtue. In truth, he was tying his reputation to a time bomb. Whoever would dig up that foundation centuries later would find his finger pry, and scorched into the crime. That is not rebellion, that is architecture as revenge. But Esperanza's manipulation did not end in stone. She weaponized, naming itself. The Archbishop, overcome with admiration for her charity and composure, gave her a title from the pulpit, Our Lady of Consolations. To the city it was reverence. To Esperanza, it was another leash. Consolation implies softness, harmlessness, femininity under control. She accepted the title with bowed head and folded hands, but in her journals she wrote differently. A leash accepted publicly can be cut privately. She knew names are chains, and the only way to wear a chain is to sharpen its links until they cut the hand of the master who pulls them. And then, the chalk. Remember the scene. A courtyard full of children, their small hands dusty with white powder, their black eyes bright with questions. Esperanza bent down and pressed chalk sticks into their palms as though she were giving them weapons. Write straighter than the men who taught your fathers, she told them. Innocent to the nuns, radical to the careful, dangerous to the powerful. That single command carried more dynamite than a dozen revolts, because writing is not ink, writing is identity. Straight lines become straight spines. Spines grow into citizens who no longer bow at the old shrines. Her enemies never feared poisons half as much as they feared her chalk. Because chalk spreads, chalk erases and rewrites. Chalk teaches memory in a way sermons cannot erase. Esperanza had planted something more enduring than revenge. Continuity. If she died, the chalk remained. If her journals were burned, the girl's hands still remembered. That is legacy, sharper than any sword. Pause now and examine your own life. Who names you? Who consoles you with velvet words? What chalk have you left behind for those who come after you? If you cannot answer, you are still inside someone else's ledger. Esperanza understood this. Power without continuity is vanity. Continuity without resistance is slavery. That is why she gave the girls chalk. This is the true terror of Esperanza de Lima. She was not content with killing men. She aimed at their memory, their rituals, their future. She bent the Archbishop himself into a silent co-conspirator, tied the Church's reputation to her revenge, and turned the hands of children into architects of tomorrow. Tell me, what general, what politician, what priest has ever matched that precision? None. That is why we still whisper her name. We close the descent, but you and I both know closure is an illusion. Stories like this never end. They echo. Esperanza died in 1834, age 80. The records state she passed quietly in her sleep. But does that sound like her? A woman who outlived conspiracies, who orchestrated coffins like compositions, who played with institutions like strings. Quietly? No. Even in death, she left an aftershock. Servants reported that the night she died, every candle in her house guttered at once as if exhaling. On her desk lay her final ledger. In it, no names of men, no symbols of moths, only a single sentence written in her careful Latin. I have done what was necessary, not righteous, not holy. Necessary. That word again, heavy as an epitaph, sharper than judgment. She was reminding the city, and us, that morality bends under the weight of survival. Her funeral was grand. The Church declared her a benefactor. Newspapers praised her charity. The city wept as if a saint had passed. They buried her under marble, not realizing they were burying a volcano whose heat would continue to rise in whispers and legends. But perhaps the darkest part of her legacy is not the deaths she caused. It is the deception she mastered. For 50 years, Esperanza wore a mask of the grieving wife, the charitable lady, the saint of orphans and widows. And society not only believed her, they applauded her. That is the lesson she left carved into history. The most dangerous predators are not wolves at the edge of the forest. They are the ones sitting in the parlor, offering you tea, weeping at funerals, receiving applause. And now the question turns to you. What will you do with this story? Will you dismiss it as Gothic history, a curiosity from another century? Or will you recognize it as an initiation? Because once you've heard it, you cannot pretend ignorance. The moth still trembles above the candle, the pouch still waits behind the altar, the rituals still bind you. You want freedom? Then you must do as Esperanza did, descend, audit your life's square, study the rituals that chain you, weaponize detail, plant chalk in the hands of those who come after you, leave letters addressed to whoever digs, build traps inside blessings, smile at the Archbishop while you sharpen the chain he thinks he's giving you. This is not mere entertainment. This is dangerous knowledge. Once you've heard it, you can't go back. You are no longer a spectator, you are an initiate. And so I ask you one last time, do you descend by choice, or do you let the moth win?